Hello everyone, my name is Jake and I wanted to set out and make an Arriflex 535 video tutorial / companion video for the manual. I realized that there aren't really any videos about this camera out there, and I wanted to make one that will hopefully help everyone who watch it familiarize themselves with the camera, the magazines, and some of the accessories. So let's get right into it. This right here is a 535B released in 1992. This is a sync sound camera that is sort of a successor / companion camera of sorts to the earlier 535A. The 535A was a camera that really was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. It had a lot of mechanical and electronic features that were very neat and very cool, but ultimately really weighed the camera down. Things like an electronic shutter. It had internal frame glow masks, so you could change the frame glow without having to remove any part of the camera. And it had a spherical and anamorphic switch right on the viewfinder. Some cinematographers appreciated the electronic features, but many found the A to simply be too heavy. It was heavier than all of the BLs before it, and for a modern camera in the 90s, it just proved to be a lot to work with for features they weren't using. So Arri, 2 years later, came back and released the Arriflex 535B, which strips out a lot of the electronic features. There's no longer an electronic shutter, but introduced an entirely new top, which weighs significantly less, and increased the camera's max frame rate from 50 to 60 FPS. And this, of course, was received a lot better. Obviously, a lighter camera was what everyone really wanted. So there are three-ish versions of this camera. There's the 535A, which was released first. There's the 535B, which you see here. And there's an interesting combination of the two that has a 535A body and a 535B top assembly and viewfinder. It keeps the electronic shutter, but loses the 10 FPS boost, so its maximum is only 50. So you may ask, how do I tell these three versions apart? It's relatively simple. The two ways to do it are either to look at the top assembly or the door. Starting with the top, the 535A will have a single gray vertical handle right in the middle of the viewfinder assembly. The B, however, will have at least one horizontal handle further back. In addition, it can also have two vertical handles stretching out. These are also called bullhorns by some people. And the best way to tell the B and the AB apart is to look at the door. Any 535A body will say Arriflex 535, and any B body will say Arriflex 535B. So if it says Arriflex 535 on the door, but your top is a B, it's a pretty good chance that you have an AB. But ultimately, all three of these cameras are perfectly usable. And most of the information we're going to talk about today can be applied to all three, such as the magazines, loading and threading them, the movement, and the screen down at the bottom. Ultimately, it is my hope this video will help you, but let's get right into it. All right, so now we're going to talk about power and I/O. I know that isn't the most exciting thing, but I think it's very important. So the 535B is a 24-volt camera system, like most sync sound cameras of the 90s. Arri's recommended range is between 20 and 32 volts direct current. However, if it goes below 18, the camera will automatically shut off. And we'll come back to that in a second. Back in the day, these cameras would have been powered off of large block batteries. Nowadays, of course, we do have more options. You can get specialty pieces of equipment like gold and V-mount 24-volt adapters that plug right into the Fisher pin. Alternatively, you could get modern-day Anton Bauer block batteries. Those are, of course, going to work. Or you could get a wall adapter. Now, wall adapters are interesting because you could buy one directly from someone like Wooden Camera, and of course that will work. Or if you know what you're doing, you could modify it yourself. But let's say whatever power decision you choose, you plug in the camera, turn it on, the menu system lights up, but then the moment you try to phase or turn on the camera, the whole thing shuts down. So why does this happen? Well, I'm actually going to read it directly from the manual because I think Arri explains it better than I can. The Arriflex 535B is equipped with a protective circuit which automatically turns off the camera if the voltage is less than 18 volts, like we talked about. The increased power demand when running up the camera can in some converters cause a momentary drop in the supply voltage to under 18 volts, causing the camera to turn off. Essentially, what this means is that whichever way you've chosen to power the camera, in that brief moment when the motor is requesting more power, can't supply sufficient current. If that happens, you can cycle the power, but you're going to need to get a new power supply. All right, here we are on the operator side of the camera. Of course, the biggest thing you're going to see is the door, and behind that is the movement, but we're going to come back to that. Perhaps the most important thing down here is this menu system. All right, here we are down at the menu system of the camera. This right here is with how you control the entire camera without something like the CCU or the RCU. So to start, you've got your start and stop button, a standard green button, and this little run LED next to it. And so I'll press this button in just a second, but the run light will tell you it will be red when the camera is asynchronous, and it will be green once it reaches its target speed, or it returns back to 0. So the FPS is 24, press the start button, red, now we're at 24 green, press it again to stop it, red, now we're at 0 green. Next to the start and stop button, we have the phase button. This button has 3 main functions. First, if you just press it and take your finger off, it will inch the camera ever so slightly and rotate the shutter out of the way. Now, if you press and hold the phase button, it will continuously electronically inch the camera at a rate of 1 frames per second. Additionally, it will also display your shutter angle, so in this case, 180 degrees. This is very useful if you want to see what perhaps the previous setting of the shutter was. Maybe you want to know what the previous scene had left it at. You want to make sure it was returned to your particular shutter angle that you want. That's a great way to check. However, you cannot change the shutter angle that way. Below, you've got the display lock. Switching this lock to the left will ensure that nobody can change what you have the camera set to. So in this case, we have a frame rate of 24 FPS. We can press mode. We can cycle through the menus, but we can't actually change the set frames per second. This is very useful in case you want to make sure nobody comes along and just bumps the camera changing the settings. You want to make sure you are stuck at 24 or whatever your frame rate is, and that you don't somehow end up shooting 30 FPS. Really, truly, unless you're playing in the menu, you really probably want to have the display lock on. But we're about to jump into the menus. So for starters, the 535B has 4 built-in preset frame rates. You have 24, and if you press this select button, the top of the 2 select buttons, you can actually cycle through them. So 24, 25, 29.97, and 30. Now you can, of course, set the camera to run between any frame rate between 3 and 60, but those are just your presets, your normal presets. Let's say you want to run it at 16 frames per second, all right? Well, you want to press the mode button once. Now you're in your program speed. Press and hold the top select button. Now you see the 10 digit is flashing. So press the bottom select button to change that. So there's 1. Press the top select again to change your digits. Now we're in the 1s digit, so we want to press that 3 times to get that to 16. 1, 2, 3. And now 16 has been set as our program speed. Now if we go back, you're going to see it still says 24. If we go to the PSU normal switch on the other side, and we actually do switch that to program speed, or PS, and we decide to run the camera, it will run at 16 frames a second. However, if you want a speed ramp, or if we want to return to our normal frame rate while the camera is running, simply pull that lever back up, and we return to 24, or any of the normal preset modes that you have. Two more things worth mentioning. If you want to change from feet to meters, simply press mode twice, press select until feet flashes, and very quickly press the bottom select. There you are, you're now in meters. You can also undo this very quickly the same way. Lastly, by pressing mode 3 times from the base menu, you can get to an area where you can change the synchronous beeps that play when you reach your frame rate and when you get back to 0. To do this, press the top select twice, And now press the bottom select. When the dashes are on the bottom, that means there will be no beeps, either at the beginning or end. Left being the beginning, right being the end. Press it again. Now we have no beep in the beginning, a beep in the end. And there we have beep at the beginning, beep at the end. Why might you want this? Well, you may want no beeps in the case of you're recording a rehearsal and you don't want the actor to know. Or maybe you want a beep at both the beginning and the end so that the camera operator will know without directly having to look at the little light. Lastly, something that can be important. See here we have our feet, how many feet that the camera has recorded. It will actually only record feet when there's film moving through it. At the moment there's no film. See, it does not go up. But if you want to reset this, simply hold the bottom select button for 3 seconds and it returns to 0. All right, here we are on the assistant side of the camera. Now, compared to the operator side, there's not too much going on here, but there are a couple things worth mentioning. At the very bottom, you've of course got your accessory ports we talked about earlier. You've got your IVS up here, which again, really should be its own video at a later date. You've got a start and stop button, does the same exact thing as the green button on the other side. Now, interestingly enough, you have a button here and a little switch. The button, the prog or probe button, is used to activate program mode within the camera. So you can use that for things like speed ramping. Next to it, this little switch, at the bottom, it says PS or program speed and CCU for camera control unit. And at the top, it says normal. Again, this is used to switch between what you're running on the camera. So on the bottom, now it's PS CCU, and at the top, it is now normal. If I were running the camera at 24 frames and my program speed was 60, if I started the camera now, it would run at 24, and then if I switched it down, it would speed ramp up to 60. Starting at the front of the camera, the Arriflex 535B has a PL lens mount, and that's pretty much the only mount you're ever going to see. To open the mount, simply turn it counterclockwise, take out the cap, and there you go. Now, if you press phase, you can see the shutter. So now we've moved it into a position where we could look through the ground glass, or move it again if you want the shutter to be out of the way. Now, I'm going to show you how to adjust the shutter angle, but it is very important that you turn the camera off. The camera will speed happily if you have something in here, whether it's your finger or the 2mm hex tool. It does not care, and it will break your mirror. So hopefully we can avoid that. First thing first, insert it to where it says lock or loose. You want to turn it counterclockwise so that it becomes loose. You don't want it locked into place. We're about to change it. Give that a good turn. Go over here to where it says close and open. You're going to want to do either or, whichever way you feel like setting it. In this case, I'm going to open it up more. And there you go. Now go back. Suppose you don't have to lock it, but it's best practice to do so. Give it a few turns. It'll lock pretty easily. Take the hex tool out. Turn the camera back on now that there's nothing in there. Give it a phase so that if someone were to come along and look through the viewfinder, they would get an image. You can put your cap back on. And here's the interesting part. If you were to hold down phase, it will actually tell you your exact shutter angle. So it says 180 degrees, which is what I set it to. Now that will work with any of the shutter angles. So if you set it to 85.2, that's what it'll say. So it's a great way to check down here. Again, you cannot electronically change it, but it will tell you exactly what it is. All right, here we are looking at a side view of the top and viewfinder assembly. So a couple things before we switch to a bird's eye view. We've got our Arri glow knob. So by turning that clockwise, you get the maximum glow. And by turning that all the way to the left counterclockwise, you diminish the glow and then eventually turn it off. Next to that here, you've got your port for a heated eye cup. So unfortunately, I do not have a heated eye cup, but if I did, there would be a small port on it that would connect to a cable that would go right in there and give the eye cup power, which is very useful if you're in a cold environment so it doesn't fog up. Back here, you have your release button and this lever We'll come back to that, but they can be very useful. And lastly, your grip assembly. All right, here we are at the top of the viewfinder and the top assembly. A couple quick things to point out before we move to the viewfinder. For starters, you have your focus marks, which is where the film is in the camera. This is where you're going to want to measure to if you have a tape measure and you're trying to get focus by measuring. You also have your little bubble measure, which is very helpful for keeping the camera level. And you have a contrast filter built into the top assembly. This is, for anyone curious, it is an ND.6, and you can turn it on and off right within the viewfinder very easily. Great way to see what an ND might look like, or if you just want the filter for the eyepiece. Speaking of the viewfinder and eyepiece, this is a continuation of what Arri had been doing with the BL line, but it has some new features which are very nice. For starters, maybe you are a person who is left eye dominant and you don't want to get this close to the camera and have to turn your entire head. Well, by turning this ring right here, you can actually pull the entire eyepiece and viewfinder over, giving you more space to move your head in. Additionally, maybe you don't like the angle of the eyepiece. By coming over to this dial right here and turning it counterclockwise, you actually loosen it, allowing it to be turned, and clockwise to lock it into place. Another interesting thing of note is now, same thing with the 535A, but the 535B can have the entire viewfinder shift over to the other side. This is very useful for whatever reason. There's no space on the operator side, or perhaps the operator just likes to be on the right-hand side. Move it back over. Now you may say, well, when you flip it like that, your image is not going to be right side up. That is correct, but Arri did think of this. There's a small silver button right here and a dial. If you press it and turn the dial while looking through the eyepiece, you can actually completely orient your image 360 degrees. So you can set your image to be right side up in any angle, whether you're here or here. Now, moving on to the eyepiece itself. Of course, you've got the diopter right here. This is what the operator would use. They would focus this to their eye so that they can tell what's in focus. And you have the eyepiece, the eye cup specifically. This pops right off. So you can clean the glass there, or if you had a heated eye cup, you could put that on instead. Something very important to note is that your eye cup is going to have a little shutter that you can open and close. Like just about any reflex film camera, when you aren't looking through, you're going to want to have it closed. Because if you don't do that, light's going to travel back through the viewfinder and may potentially get on your film, and you may be very unhappy. So make sure whenever you're not looking through and there's film rolling, that your eye's up here. Now, there are also a few accessories in the form of extensions. So, first thing you want to do is turn this ring right here to the just in front of the diopter, turn it clockwise. Your eyepiece pops right off. Now, there are a couple of extensions. There's a medium one, which would give you about this much space. It's not the most common piece, but it does exist. But there's also a longer extension eyepiece, and this is very useful if there's things in the way or you want to get further away from the side of the camera. So, you remove the caps, and then you can attach it right where you took the eyepiece off. Counterclockwise to lock, and there you go. Now, it isn't good to leave this much weight resting entirely on the joint here. You don't want to leave it doing that for very long. Now, I like to use this little lever here and rest it on this handle. That's not really right. It's not really something you should do. I don't think it's correct, but it does take the weight off the elbow, which is more important than this little lever here. There is a correct way to do that, and we'll get to it in a minute. You have your eyepiece, attach that to the end, counterclockwise to lock, and there you go. This is your extension eyepiece. Very useful if you're using a 1,000-foot mag and you want to get further back, or for some reason, you can't be right here. Now, the extension eyepiece has two features. First, you have your eyepiece level. This piece on the end would slide right into there, facing down, of course, And essentially, it would plug into another small piece on your tripod, connecting right here, and it would support the entire extension and keep it level without having to put tension on this poor little arm. Unfortunately, I don't have that second piece. You'll often find them coming with tripods. Unfortunately, I just don't have it. But the other feature I do have. This eyepiece extension right here actually features an optical punch. So if you wanted to get fine focus or see very small details, simply turn this lever down here. So that's not zoomed. That is zoomed. And you are now getting a punched image of your scene. Very helpful if you want to get very pristine focus. It's very important. One more thing to note. Between the viewfinder and the IVS, there is a beam splitter roughly right there. What a beam splitter does is it dictates what percentage of the light goes to the viewfinder and what goes to the IVS. So in this case, it's probably 80% of the light to the viewfinder and 20% to the IVS. So we would call it an 80-20 beam splitter. Now, there are also, for other cameras, 50-50 and even 100% to the viewfinder beam splitters if you wanted to completely take the IVS off. But for the most part, I find that 80-20 seem to be very common. All right, but that's all well and good. But while the viewfinder is off, let's say I want to put the camera into Steadicam mode, or I want to put on a video top, which is essentially just a small top with an access for an IVS, so I can run it in a Steadicam or on a crane, or in a low mode if you so desire. How do I remove this whole assembly? Well, pretty straightforward. First, I'm going to want to unscrew the IVS here. Pops right out there. Unplug it so that you don't bring the camera with you. Now, you want to be very careful here because this swings forward very quickly. Depress this button right here, the release button, and bring this black lever up, and the entire viewfinder assembly comes off. Now that we have the top removed, there's not usually too much you want to do with it, but there is one key thing. Underneath this cover right here is where you would insert a frame glow mask. So let's open it up. Just a quick turn, pops open like that. As you can see, there are currently no frame glow masks in there, but I have one right here. Now this is kind of key. You want to see this, there's one side with that angle right there. You want to insert that pointing away from the viewfinder here. So like this. Give it a little bit of a push. There you go. You now have inserted a new frame glow mask. And close it the exact same way you opened it. There you go. Now you can put this back on the camera and you have a new frame glow mask. All right, so we're gonna talk about I/O ports on the back of the camera. For starters, unfortunately, we're not gonna talk about these top 5. These are part of the IVS, and that IVS actually has a 108-page manual, and I don't want to drag this video out with information that may or may not be relevant to every 535, so maybe that's a future video, but right now we're not really going to talk about it. What we're primarily concerned with here are these 5 ports. Starting from the top to the bottom, we have the display unit port. This is for an external accessory called the display unit. It allowed you to see the internal camera information such as frame rate. Below it, we have the remote unit. This was to an accessory, a small one, that allowed you to change the frame rate and various other things. Below is an interesting port. This is for the master clock unit and external synchronization unit. Essentially, these are 2 accessories that were heavily involved with timecode. That's right, the 535B can actually record timecode right onto the side of the film. This isn't really something most people are going to be using nowadays, and I'm not really going to talk about it. There's certainly more information in the manual, and if you really want me to discuss it in another video, we certainly can, but I'm going to skip over it right now. Below that, you have the CCU port, and this is probably your most useful of these 4. This is for the camera control unit, which kind of looks like a little mini keyboard or typewriter with a screen. This allowed you to do various things like start and stop the camera, change the frame rate, but it also allowed for putting information in that was relevant for time code. Again, that's not really something you're going to use. What is more exciting and a bit more useful is the remote control unit, which plugs into the same exact port. This is a device with a dial that allows you to control speed ramping, a start and stop button, and even a way to control the electronic shutter if this was a 535A or AB. Lastly, on the very bottom here is your 24-volt Fisher power connector. This is a standard Arri power connector. You've probably seen them on the Alexa or maybe later film cameras. There's not too much to say about it. If you've used Fisher connectors before, this one will be very familiar. But of course, power is not too interesting unless we know how to turn on the camera. So on the bottom here, you've got your on and off switch. Currently it is off, it is back. Push it forward to turn it on. Pretty straightforward. What's next to it, if you can see here, is a small port cover for a battery. This is what's called the buffer battery, and it was used in time code. Essentially, if you turned off the camera, this buffer battery would allow you to keep time code for up to 8 hours. Nowadays, it isn't particularly useful. You might not even choose to put the battery in there, but I just wanted to explain what this port is for. Lastly, on the front, on the bottom here, you have 3 accessory ports. As you can see, one is already running a cable to the IVS. It's just another option in case you choose to use it, but they're very simple. Plug and unplug very easily. Now, some 535Bs may have an additional accessory port right here. Most that I've seen do not, but it could be a good option if you see a camera with that and you imagine yourself running a lot of accessories off of it. It could be a good option for you. All right, this here is a 535 400-foot coaxial magazine. It's pretty industrial, if you can't tell. You have a feed side and a take-up side, and they're both aligned on the same axis, thus coaxial. Now, you have a couple things on the exterior. You have a manual judge for how much film you have on the inside. You never want to use that while it's running, but for when the camera is still or the magazine hasn't been threaded on yet, this is a great way to tell how much film you have. Next to this, you have your film advancing / inching knob. We'll come back to that later when we're loading it. You have your loop protector here, which can also be used as a handle. To remove that, pull this pin out and slide it. Simple as that. On the other side, this is the take-up side. You have an electronic footage counter. This is very useful for when it plugs into the camera. You can set exactly how many feet you have, so 379 feet or anything like that. Next, I want to show you something on the inside of the magazine before we load it, just to get a better understanding of what's going on. So you may be tempted to try and pull up that notch, but actually what you have to do is depress this button in the middle and then pull up the notch. That button deactivates the safety right there. Turn it, and the lid lifts off. Now, you've got a platter system here, of course, that spins, and this is a split core. We'll come back to that. But what I want to actually talk about is right here. There's a small button right there, not sure if you can see it. Press that and pull gently. This is your film spiral. In a lot of ways, this is actually quite similar to your film gate. You really want to take it out to clean it, but you want to make sure that you definitely do not scratch it because your film is going to be traveling around this. That way, when it comes from the feed side, it actually ends up on the same plane and same side as the takeout side. And I'll show you that when we load it in just a second. To put it back in, align it up correctly. You want to make sure there's a small notch here. And you want to push this so that pin comes out. Align it up and push it in very gently. It can be a little tricky to line up, as you can see, and it will fit snugly into that notch. So, let's go over loading. So, here we are on the feed side of the magazine, and I'm going to show you how to load it. So, to start, you're going to need to do this in the dark. open this side the same way you did the other, the take-up side. See this flap? Flip it up. Now, there is a light seal going all around this. You're going to want to make sure that's in good condition, but I also recommend taping the magazine once it's been loaded. Color coding can also help tell what type of film is in the magazine. Now, I have roughly 300 feet of a dummy roll of 5222. That's why it's this color. Now, a lot of people's first instincts would be to flat out just drop it on the platter here. But a lot of ACs, and Arri even in the manual, will tell you that's not really how they want you to do it. Again, it's up to personal preference, but I'm going to show you this way. So what you do, rest the film on the magazine cover, make sure that it's going counterclockwise, get a good amount, and you're going to want to slide it right up between this roller and the flat edge here. You're also going to want to flip the advancing knob up so you see the red. After a certain point, that will click and the film will not be able to advance. This is because you've hit the point where there are notches here that are about to feed it into the film spiral, and this knob right here will help you do that. So give it a spin until it comes out on the other side. And once it does that, there we go. We can now put the film on the middle here, pull out our slack. One very important thing to note, you're going to want to turn the platter until you hear a click, like that, so we know the film is locked on. Now, put this little flap back down, put the magazine cover back on. One click, two clicks, now it's set. And now the rest of this can be done on the light. So for starters, flip this back, you no longer need it. Take your film, I'll show you on this side. Take your film, notice that the emulsion is facing out. There's a small slot on the other side of the throat here. Feed it in. Open it up. And now you may say, well, Jake, are we going to keep a loop? Well, the 535 actually has both sides of the magazine run by independent motors. So you can adjust the loop size at any moment. Unlike the BL or the SR3, you don't need to set loop sizes. So in the take-up side, you've got a split core. Take your film, there's a small slit right there, feed it in and lock it. Making sure to keep a little bit of a loop, pull it from one side and turn it around the split core here. Just a few times until you're happy with it. There we go. I don't think that's going anywhere. And now, take your cover, put it back on, lock it, click, click. And if you so choose, you can get the loop protector and slide that on. And there you are, a loaded 535 400-foot coaxial magazine. All right, this here is a 1,000-foot coaxial magazine. It's pretty much the same as the 400, minus the increased size, of course. The other thing that's worth noting, you have another handle here. In case for some reason you didn't have a loop protector, there's another way to carry it, because these things can get rather heavy. So I'm going to show you how to load it. I'm going to go relatively quickly while still talking you through it. It's essentially the same process as the 400-foot coaxials. First, remove the throat cover here. You're going to want to, again, this next part in the dark, pull off the mag cover, put the flap up. Now here, I have a 1,000-foot roll of film, and as you can see, that's going to fit quite snugly there. So you're going to want to counterclockwise pull some film, flip the advancing knob up, thread it in the same exact way between the roller and the side. It'll catch, start to turn it so it moves through the film sprocket, and in just a second it will come out the other side. And there you have it. So You want to be careful with this. This is a lot of film, and you certainly don't want to drop it. Very carefully seat it on that center, and there you go. Pull a little bit more of the film out. Turn that knob down. We don't need it anymore. Remember to turn this flap back. The lid will not go back on without that, but it's still worth mentioning now. 2 clicks, and now you can do the rest in the light. Flip the mag over. Open it again. Film spiral, split core. Take your film. Again, worth noting, the emulsion is facing outward. Make sure it's going clockwise. Essentially, it is forming a P. Give it a few spins. And there you have it. Put the lid back on. And that is essentially how you do it. One last thing to note with split cores is they are a little dangerous, especially with 1,000-foot magazines, because 1,000 feet of film is going to fill this whole platter up and there will be no core in the center. Taking them out, you're going to have to be careful. In general, you're going to want to be very, very careful that you don't drop that, and when you get it out and put it back in your container, you're going to probably want to drop a core in the center so it keeps its shape when you send it to the lab. But I can put this back on, and I'm going to show you the lightweight or Steadicam magazine, which is a bit different than these. This right here is the Displacement or lightweight or Steadicam. It has a couple different names. 400-foot magazine for the 535. It's a bit different. It's got a couple different features. For instance, it only has a manual film gauge. It has no electronic gauge, but it is a lot lighter. So let's get right into it. First up, you're going to want to remove the loop protector. This is exactly the same part on the Coaxial magazines. They are interchangeable. Flip the magazine over. You have a timecode sensitivity option. Again, I'm not really going to go over timecode. It is very interesting how it's implemented if you feel like reading the manual. Now this part is very interesting. The little contraption right here to open the mag does not have a safety button like the Coaxials. So you're going to want to always tape this once there's film inside. It's very simple. Comes up, turns, and now it will open. So be careful if there's film inside. So we've got 2 platters. Again, same idea. No loop sizes needed. These can move interchangeably. You would, of course, have 1 core that comes in with your film on this side. And you're going to need to put another core on this side. So put your core in. Remember to spin the magazine till it locks. These magazines are a little bit different in how they're loaded. They operate in a 9-piece sense. And I will show you exactly what that means. I have my same 5222 right here. I'm going to show you how to load it by putting it directly on the platter. Again, this would all have to be done in the darkness. Because it's all one side, everything related to your film has to be done in the complete dark. Slide it on. Make sure to lock it. There's that click. You have the film. Slide it through in a clockwise method this time, not counterclockwise. So you may notice it forms a 9. Now, take your film, and this outer part, this throat per se, is exactly the same as the Coaxials. The film slides through. And on the core, you've got a very small slit. I like to take the film and bend it, and then loop it around a couple times while making sure to keep your loop. After you manage to spin it around a few times, and you're confident that it isn't coming loose, you're pretty much done. One last thing to note, you're going to want to take a look at the light seals, like always. They are different on the Displacement rather than the Coaxial. But as you can see here, this is a 9 and this is a P, and that's what I meant. This side comes up as a P and this side is a 9, Panavision does a 99, but Arri and Moviecam and some others typically do 9 and then P on their displacement magazines. So, close it back up. Again, I recommend taping that. In fact, I recommend taping completely around the edge of the magazine. It seems to be just a safer way to do it. Make sure your loop size is roughly a foot. Again, it can be adjusted at any time. And that's it. This is the last magazine, and that's how you load it. Now let's show you threading them on the camera. All right, now we're gonna get to perhaps one of the most important parts. The internals of the camera, the movement, and of course loading it. So, open the camera up. Remove the throat cover here. It's just a small panel. And here are the internals of the camera. Couple things to talk about. You have your manual inching knob here. Turns 360, and you can turn it forward or reverse to help you just get an idea of how your film's going to move through. You've got your pitch adjustment, which will be more useful in just a second. You've got your sprockets here and here. These can actually be pushed in and can help you adjust your loop size. We'll come back to that. And you've got your sprocket guides, these two silver pieces on the top and the bottom, that are opened by switching this lever to the top. And as you can see, this red light went on where it says run. The camera will not start while those are open to avoid a jam. So, if you want to load it, a couple things to set up before we bring the magazine in. First, set this to open. Second, make sure that the white line on the inching knob is perfectly aligned to where it says load position and there's another white line. Go up to the top where there's this small lever. Pull it all the way down, and then you can pull the entire movement block back. This right here is a 400-foot coaxial magazine, and I'm going to show you how to thread it on the camera. The process is exactly the same for any of the magazines, so all of this information can be applied to all three. So, take the magazine, make sure your two guide rails, or dovetail, or whatever you want to call it, is properly aligned with the equivalent on the camera throat. Slide it on, ensuring it all catches. Watch for your film loop. Make sure that it is successfully getting interwoven here. You don't want to damage it. You'll hear a click. This will come forward. That means that the magazine is now fully attached. All right, now that the magazine has been fitted on the camera, we can go in and clean up our loop size and fully thread the camera. So first things first, push in the film. Make sure that it is catching with the sprockets on the top and the bottom. When you're reasonably happy with that and you have enough film for your loop at the top and the bottom, close the guides. And this part's a little interesting. You can do it several different ways, but I like to pull the movement forward while also either with the top or the bottom loop, pulling it up ever so slightly when the movement gets close, so that the pins on the movement correctly match with the perforations on the film. So now my loops on the top and bottom are pretty bad, but you can push in these sprockets, essentially. You can depress them and they can act as loop adjusters. There's a white line on the top and the bottom that you can adjust to. And once you're happy with that, you can phase it to make sure it's going to go well. Seems pretty good. And we can, of course, run it at 24 frames. And that's how you thread the camera. All right, one thing to note, when the magazine has been loaded and the guides have been successfully closed and the movement put back, you can actually set the amount of film in the magazine. You have your electronic counter up here. So let's say there's 11 feet, now there's 21 feet, 300 feet, 131 feet, 231 feet. That is how you electronically set it. Remember, the displacements don't have those, but the coaxials, both 400 and 1,000 foot, do. Just remember that you're going to have to close the guides in order to do this. So here, we've actually gone back to 5213. We've already threaded it up, but we're going to show you what happens when the camera runs through film. So, turn it on. the camera will automatically stop. All right, let's say you thread up your film and you've got good loop sizes, but for some reason, it happens to be a little loud. Well, if your loop truly is good, the best thing to check is your pitch adjustment right here. And this is essentially adjusting the film for different manufacturers and emulsions. So this is 5222, which is ever so slightly different than, say, 5219. So what Arri recommends doing is running the camera and very slowly turning this knob until it gets quieter. See? Normally, when I'm running color film, I usually find a good spot and leave it, and that tends to be good. But this is just an option if the camera happens to be running too loud and you're confident your loops are set correctly. Now, let's take a look at the gate. I highly recommend turning the camera off. It won't start spinning because we're going to pull the movement back, but either way, better to be safe. Pull the movement back like you normally would. And there's a small lever up top, as you may be able to see here. Pull it down. The gate pops up. Pull it up ever so slightly and out. Now, as you can see up top and on the side, it says 3-perf universal gate. You might pull this out for two different reasons. With a 4-perforation gate, you might have a format mask that you want to input to lock yourself at a certain format, but perhaps more importantly, to clean and inspect the gate. Because sometimes debris will build up, or film can get stuck in either of the two little channels the pins travel through if it happens to punch a new perf. You may also want to clean it, but you want to be careful about what you clean it with because any scratches could result in the film itself getting scratched. So, to put it back in, it's relatively simple. Realign it. You want to be careful. Bottom goes in first. Pull the lever back. Slide it back into place where it was. It clicks in. And there you go. Now you can move your movement back forward. Now, here's an issue that might actually happen, and it certainly happened to me. If you've pulled the movement back and you open or close the gates, could be either or, and you're trying to adjust the loop size by turning the sprockets, once you close the gate and try to push the movement back, you may find it won't go forward. You haven't actually broken the camera. What happens is when the movement block moves back, it disengages from the rest of the camera. So in order to fix this, try to bring the movement block back forward while slowly turning the sprockets. After a certain point, it should slide back forward. A couple other things worth mentioning. The screen down here may display jam, which of course would mean that the film is jammed. This can happen for a number of reasons. If the magazine is not well kept and you were deciding to run it at a very high frame rate, perhaps even in reverse, you might actually get a jam, especially back here. That's something that can happen. The camera is smart enough to stop for the most part when that happens to prevent damage to itself, but that can happen, and of course it can happen on any camera. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. This right here is the RCU-1, or Remote Control Unit 1. It actually plugs right into the CCU port on the camera that we showed you earlier. And you can do just about anything you can do on the internal camera system right here on this little remote. It's especially helpful if you're trying to get away from the camera or it's up on a ladder or a high place like a crane. This is a great little device. So, turn on the camera. Once that little green light says ready, you're going to want to make sure that you're set to PS CCU on the side. If you're not for some reason and then you're set on normal and you're going to try to change your ramp, it will say not PS CCU. So you need to make sure that you switch that down. Now, I'm not going to go over all the features here and how to do them specifically because there's a lot to go over and I don't want this video to be too long. But some things you can do. You can, of course, phase the camera. You can run it. You have a dial down here that you can adjust your FPS. Now, you can ramp this in two different ways. You can spin the dial with the right settings, or you can set a timed ramp. So I want it to go from 24 over the course of a certain amount of time and end at another frame rate. So that's pretty cool. Additionally, if you had a 535A or AB with an electronic shutter, you can change your shutter angle as you can see here. Up here, you have the same camera system that you saw on the body. So you have mode, select, and set. Very simple, very straightforward. You can change the internal settings as long as that switch is set to the right part on the assistant side. Lastly, the very top here, you have reverse and forward. Now the 535 is perfectly capable, along with all the magazines, of going reverse. I didn't show it on the internal system because it's much, much easier to do here. What you want to do is simply turn that so the dot matches up, pointing to the reverse dot. And if you were to run the camera, see it has an R right there for reverse. It is now running in reverse. Stop it. Turn it back. And there you go. All right, that's the 535B camera. I hope that this video has been at the very least informative, and I hope at least a little entertaining. Please forgive me for my disheveled kind of sweaty appearance. It is 100 degrees when we were shooting this, and we have to turn the air conditioning off so it doesn't come on the audio. So, of course, I probably look a little bit tired. Also, this is the first one of these I've ever made. If you like it, let me know, but I apologize if it's a little rough around the edges. That being said, hopefully it has been informative. You know, I hope that you walk away with a little bit of an appreciation of the camera, but maybe also an understanding of why you may not want to shoot with it. You know, the 535 is a heavy camera with 400 feet of film and a 400-foot coaxial magazine, and the body, it weighs 38-ish pounds. You know, in order to support that, you're going to need a heavy-duty tripod, 60, 70 pounds. That's industrial, and a lot of people don't want to work with that. It might slow a lot of people down, If you're used to 16 and you have a smaller camera crew and you usually move very quickly, this is just not the camera for you. You'd have to completely change the way you operate. It probably isn't the right idea to shoot with this. That being said, if you're used to bigger cameras, if you like, the full body Alexas and building them out, or you like the Arri ST, but maybe you don't have the budget to rent the ST, the 535 is a great alternative, It has a lot of features of something like the ST. Granted, it doesn't have all the electronic features, and the ST has plenty, but it has a good deal that most cinematographers could work with. It gets the same image, it's extremely steady, it's very reliable, so that's something to consider. Lastly, if you want to maybe buy the 535, that's a little tricky, because while it is definitely the cheapest gray body camera you can get from Arri right now, on the flip side, if you don't have that tripod and that support, it's going to cost you 2 or 3 times what the camera costs. So you need to take that into consideration. But ultimately, that's up to you, whether you choose to use it or not. It's film. It's the same image as a newer camera, but of course, it's heavy. So hopefully this video has helped educate you a little bit. You know how to load the camera, you know how to thread it. If you have any questions, please let me know, or recommendations on how to improve these videos in the future if I somehow make another one. But yes, thank you very much for watching, and I think that's it. All right, last thing. I really, really want to thank Lisa and Rich from Hawk Commercial Filmmaking, without whom this video would not have happened. They were incredibly generous to let us use their studio and their lighting. Without them, this project wasn't really going anywhere, and they really helped us make it a reality. I also want to thank Kyle. He has a YouTube channel of his own where he talks about projection and film projection. Completely different end of the art of film, but I think it's really cool, and I will link his channel down below. Lastly, if you want to reach out and post a comment, if you have any questions about something maybe I didn't cover, or you just want to talk film, or suggestions for maybe a future video, please reach out. I'd love to talk film with just about anybody. So yeah, drop me a comment and that would be great. Thank you.